A long, long time ago, in a faraway place called America, there were a group of people that wanted to govern themselves. And they decided they would create a government. This government would have three branches. That way, anytime two of them got together, they would always come up with a decision. They had the executive, who was the big bosses in charge, the judicial, that sat in judgment, and then you had the legislative, that was divided up into two different houses. Now they would handle the money and come up with all the rules and regulations. And our story really is about that branch, that legislative branch. Because one day the legislative branch got together and they was trying to decide what was best for us. And they decided to go out and buy a bunch of stuff that they thought we needed. And once they bought it, they came and they tried to give it to us, and they found out that the bunch of stuff that they thought we needed, we didn't want. And now they had a bunch of stuff that not only did we not want it, they didn't want it, and we didn't need it. They had a whole bunch of junk that they didn't want, we didn't need. They were trying to figure out what to do with it. And then that's when one of them said, wait a minute, let's get that stuff out of here, because this is America. We got amber waves of grain, purple mountain majesties. Let's find somewhere to put that bunch of stuff, that junk that they don't want, we don't need. So they decided to put it out in the middle of the desert. So they moved all that stuff that they didn't want, we don't need, out into the middle of the desert, and they had lay for quite some time, until one day a bunch of them was sitting around, and one of them said, hey, you know what? You remember all that stuff that they don't want, we don't need? It sure be a shame if somebody came along and stole it. We might need to find somebody to keep an eye on that thing. So they hired a watchman to go out and watch over the stuff that was sitting in the middle of the desert that they didn't want, we don't need. Things went along fine for a long time until one day they were sitting around again, and somebody said, you know what? We got that night watchman out there watching over that stuff that they don't want, we don't need. But how we know he's doing his job? He needs a supervisor. Somebody to supervise his actions. So they hired a supervisor to go out and keep an eye on the night watchman who was watching over the stuff in the middle of the desert that they don't want, we don't need. Went along for quite some time until one day they was at a committee meeting and they was all just laughing and talking, and says, you know what, we got that supervisor out there, but we don't know what he's doing. We need somebody to keep records on what's going on out there, so you know what, he needs a clerk. So they hired a clerk to work for the supervisor who was watching over the night watchman who was out in the middle of the desert, keeping an eye on the stuff that they don't want, we don't need. Now the clerk was keeping an eye on everything, and then one day said, well, you know what, we got all these documents and everything, but how we know that they're doing the job the way we want it done? I think we need a quality control inspector. So they hired a quality control inspector to review the documents that was written by the clerk who was keeping up with the supervisor who was watching over the night watchman who was watching over the stuff that was sitting in the middle of the desert that they don't want, we don't need. Well, time went on. And then one day, somebody said, you know what? We got all these papers and everything here. We might need to make sure that everything is going on out there like we want it. I think we ought to put together a special investigative committee to go out there and check on that project we got going on in the middle of the desert. So that's what they did. They put together a special investigative committee to go out and check on the quality control inspector who was reviewing the records that was written by the clerk, who was keeping up on the supervisor who was watching over the night watchman who was sitting out in the middle of the desert watching over the stuff that they don't want and we don't need. And that investigative committee came back and they told everybody, that project y'all got going on out there in the desert is over budget. We've got to find a way to cut costs on that project. And somebody came up with an idea. And you know what them rascals did? They fired the night watchman. And that's the way it is with bureaucrats and bureaucracy. No matter how bad things get, Well, to quote Bill Clinton, if at first you don't succeed, you run the chance of failure. And that's just my opinion.